I'm your host, U.S. Army Iraq combat medic, veteran Colonel Dr. Damon Arnold. And for our guest panelists, this is really a person that is extremely important in some of the things that are going on right now. She is a person who's a correspondent extraordinaire, but Julie Rovner is a chief
Rovner.
Rovner is a chief Washington correspondent and host of the KFF News Weekly Health Policy podcast. And she brings a wealth of information, has been very, very supportive of the things that we've been doing for veterans over a long-term period of time as we've been broadcasting. Today, we're going to discuss the KFF Health News article. Harris, once Biden's voice on abortion, would take an outspoken approach to health. This is really one of the key central issues that I think her campaign is addressing. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Julie. And why don't you tell us why this is important, what you think that this approach is, why it's needed right now to have this approach as well.
Well, I think up until now, the presidential campaign has been very much focused on the issues that the Republicans would like it focused on for the most part: immigration, crime. To some extent, the Democrats have focused on reproductive health and abortion. But as we all know, that was not an issue that President Biden was super comfortable talking about. He, practicing Catholic, older gentleman, it was not sort of his most comfortable issue. So he basically delegated it to the vice president, who has been outspoken over the course of her career, not just about abortion rights, but about other reproductive health issues, about maternal health in general and African-American maternal health in particular, and what a really abysmal job the United States does in general with maternal health. Plus, when she was the Attorney General in California, she did a lot of work with things like health antitrust and prescription drug prices. So there's every reason to believe that as she sort of takes over at the top of the ticket, which is certainly what seems to be happening now, we're going to probably see a lot more discussion about healthcare issues writ large than we've seen, at least thus far this year.
Yeah, and one of the things that is really gets to my heart, as a practicing physician, retired now, but I always have nightmares about what is happening to women in the interim. In many of these states, and this is a very nonpartisan view, but it's the inhumanity and the lack of compassion being shown to women who find themselves in these situations, especially in all the situations. I don't want to minimize any of them, but when you have rape and incest and those kinds of issues, I can't see how you could be morally supportive of something that is coming out of such a heinous act, and not to have the woman have the right to decide what course she wants to take in life with that. I'm a male, but I can imagine if I were female and I was raped or I had incest, I had to live with the consequences of that for the rest of my life. Every time I look at this child, I have to remember what I went through in order to be in this situation. And I think it's morally, and some people can deal with that. Some people decide to go on and do whatever they feel is right in their own religious view or in their view of life. But I think women should have the ultimate choice. It's your body. Every time you go to the hospital and you have a procedure done, you have a surgical procedure or a medical procedure, they have you sign a consent form. And the consent form says that I agree to having this procedure done because this is my body and this is what, I can't see how this doesn't extend to that. And so, what do you think some of the hurdles that are going to be thrown in her way? Or is there a need to revitalize the conversation around this and making sure that people understand what is really at stake?
I think that in some ways, the bigger we've seen it happen so more often are women who are later in pregnancy, who have pregnancy complications, who are, by and large, these are women with wanted pregnancies who tried hard, in many cases spent tens of thousands of dollars to get pregnant, have, set up nurseries and decorated them already. And then at 18 or 20 or sometimes even 24 weeks, something goes terribly wrong. And either, the pregnancy is sort of incompatible with life. What happens frequently is that the woman's water breaks early, which basically means that the fetus can't survive, and she is at risk of all kinds of infection and terrible consequences, including loss of life and loss of future fertility, the ability to have another baby. And we've seen this play out in a number of states with abortion bans. In Idaho, for instance, where the ban said that doctors could not perform abortions even in medical emergencies, only in life-threatening medical emergencies. We've seen women being airlifted out to other states who normally would get treatment, who again are put at greater risk because they have to wait longer. They have to wait and then be put on a helicopter and taken somewhere else rather than be treated at the medical facility where they are, and where there's a medical professional who is able to do the procedure that they need, and yet it is deemed illegal. And this is a legal fight that is still continuing to this day. So I think there's a lot. We saw this in Texas, a number of women who had health-threatening complications with their pregnancies sued, and basically the Texas Supreme Court said, not up to us to figure out, what's illegal and what isn't. It's up to the doctors. And the doctors, these laws have penalties that involve jail time and hundreds of thousands of dollars and loss of medical licenses. And they are legitimately concerned about doing things that they believe are medically indicated, but they could possibly be hauled into court for.
So what do you think should be done now? What do you see as the major position that should be taken as far as if President, soon to be President Harris succeeds and winning winning the presidential election? What do you think should be the view taken, and how can things be made better? Is it something that she has to approach the Congress on, or the legal system? How can she sort of implement a better policy position?
Well, at this point, it's mostly in the courts. It would be very difficult. Congress could pass a law to what they call codify Roe v. Wade, which was, basically create in law what had been a constitutional right. It's unclear, what the Supreme Court would think of that, what the lower courts are going to do. A lot of this is going to continue to play out at the state level and at the legal level, although there's certainly, if Donald Trump gets back into office and if he follows some of the recommendations in both the Republican platform and some of the things that are in the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 blueprint, it would be easier for the Republicans to institute a national ban than it would for Democrats to basically preserve abortion rights, even in some of the places where it, remains today. It's more of an uphill fight for the Democrats than it would to get back to where they want to be than it would be for the Republicans to go further than they are now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. Yes. Yeah. And, that's that Project 2025. It's a 999 page document that, it seems like they tried to distance themselves from. But many of the people that were on the, who were members of his, his staff and other people who were in, like Ben Carson and all that, were authors on this document. And it is really, it should terrify the American people if they really understood what was in that document. And it's also has a lot of issues surrounding veterans as well. I think it says page 641 on. They talk about veterans for about another 15 pages, and some of the things that will be occurring with veterans. So for veterans have to be aware that your benefits and other things that you are looking at can be potentially threatened and can be minimized in a way. And this is by someone who said, well, veterans are suckers and losers. But I mean, I'm not sure if I want to put my fate into the hands of someone like that. So one of the things, too, is that she also is pushing forward on women's rights in general. So not just we have a tendency to look at abortion and that, but this will be a historic movement that we probably needed to do a long time ago, is to have a female president of the country. Many other countries have beat us to that, even though we call ourselves a democracy, where you do have women who have served in that high role and have done very well, overseas. So what do you think about that, her coming into that role, and what that will mean for the movement of the women's voices in Congress as well, because they are directly connected to a president now that is in that light. So, any thoughts on that?
I will say I'm not good at predicting who's going to win what, but what I will definitely
Right.
say is that, during this week when we have seen, everyone sort of flock towards, supporting Kamala Harris, the level of excitement I've seen from women in general, from Black women in particular, and Asian women, is really off the charts. I have not seen sort of this level of excitement about people. I think after Hillary Clinton lost, there was just this thought that America isn't going to be ready for, a woman president for a very long time. And here we are 8 years later. Is America ready now? I don't know, but certainly there's a lot of people who are going to work very hard to make America ready.
Yes, yeah. And it's shame on us if we can't, come to that in this decade, in this year 2024, that we are still, looking at issues of gender, with the ability to assume leadership. That really is something that we have to sort of self-reflect on ourselves as a nation and think about what we're saying. So, I'm wondering also if the do you think that there is a more of a need to get women to understand the implications of this election? One of the things I heard, and I mentioned on an earlier portion of the podcast, is that there are people who were actually moving from the Republican Party, candidates over to supporting Kamala. So I've been hearing, rumors in the background of that happening, because I think there are people who are standing up for moral integrity, looking at, some of the traditional values we've had. Not all of them are bad, that we've been holding very dear to our heart. And I'm wondering if that is something that would be important, to reaching out to them. And then also the second issue I would love to address is having her as a commander in chief, because she'll become the commander in chief of the military services. And I know she has a lot of respect for veterans. I've seen that happen, in multiple occasions, and a lot of things that were passed through legislation and such. But any thoughts on those two issues, really galvanizing the messaging that's going out to women to to understand what this means for you, your daughters, your, aunts, your, how does this affect you personally? And then also, how will this sort of roll out as her being a commander in chief of the military?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to talk about how she's going to roll out as commander in chief. I would say, obviously she does not have a military background, but neither have many presidents who've come before her, many male presidents who've come before her. But I will say that in terms of mobilizing women and on women's issues, I do think we're starting to see a focus, and obviously it's the end of July, the election is actually getting pretty close, that there really is an enormous difference between these two candidates. There was an enormous difference between, President Biden and former President Trump too, but people were having sort of trouble getting over that. They were seeing, saying, sort of two old white men, what's the difference? There are big differences in what each of these parties would like to do in terms of pushing forward an agenda. And those agendas could not be more different. I've been covering politics since the 1980s, and this is perhaps the biggest, widest divide between the parties that I think I've ever seen.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's really worrisome, because once someone is elected, either of the parties, right, Republican or Democratic, then you have to bring the nation back together again. And if you have so much division, and we have too many issues, the former prior segment, we were talking about energy production and climate change and all the devastation we're seeing going across the country with heat disasters. And, we're going to have emergency responders up tempo, and more of them to deal with some of the catastrophic things we're seeing across the country. And we can't have a country divided on those principles, to be able to respond to citizens in a rational way. And people may have even less faith in the government, and when we need to have actually more faith, I think, in governmental institutions. I've spoken to people before about the government, and that there's some people who are anti-government. And what I usually tell them is, well, I want you to stop driving down the highway. And they go like, what are you talking about? I said, well, the government covers that, right? They're the ones who built the highways. They maintain them. They regulate them. I said, also, you may want to think about, not even leaving your home, because even the stores you go to, they have governmental oversight by your local government and the tax structure. And maybe your school should close because, they're giving the tax money to your school so your children can learn. So a really extreme anti-government sentiment is really not, it doesn't make any sense. And so we hopefully people will not be trying to do those same things. When President Biden was previously talking about gun control, and Kamala Harris was sort of pushing for gun control, and we had, unfortunately, a former president, Trump, being an assassination attempt on his life with an AR-15, which is one of the things that we were trying to ban on the streets. Those things bring to light that this really has consequences when we have a division and we start trying to separate things. And one of the sentiments from the Trump administration was that government is a deep state, and we had the Secret Service that were terrible people before, but now they're great because they saved me on the stage. We can't keep vacillating back and forth about whether government is good for us or not. And I'm hoping that the next administration is actually going to strengthen our view of government and why it's important, why we have people sitting there, why do we elect representatives and vote. So only about 32% of people vote every election, 33%. I've been, hearing different numbers. But what do you think it is that needs to be done to get people up and voting? I mean, because that, for the women's rights, that is going to be a critical issue. The abortion rights, the women's rights, having a women in leadership positions. What needs to be done to motivate people to realize, and particularly women, to realize that I need to get out there and vote?
I think people really need to understand what the stakes of this election are. I think actually Republicans have done a really effective job over the last 10 or 15 years. It's not so much that they're anti-government, it's they're anti-federal government. They believe that the federal government should basically defend the country from, beyond the borders and not a whole lot else. That's why you're constantly hearing Republicans talk about getting rid of the Department of Education, getting rid of the Department of Energy, and getting rid of, all of these things that have grown up pretty much since, FDR. And everything that the federal government does, they think could better be done at the local or possibly state level. And one of the ways that they've sort of effectuated that is by throwing sand in the gears, stopping spending bills from getting done, stopping any legislation from getting done. When the Republicans were last in charge of the Senate, they spent most of their time appointing judges. And now we're seeing what a lot of these judges are doing, which is blocking a lot of regulations in the administrative state that Democrats want to do to regulate health and safety and energy and other things that everybody depends on. And the Republicans have done a really effective job at making the public really skeptical about the ability of the federal government to do things that will make their lives better, because they've basically prevented the federal government from doing things to make their lives better. How do you fix that? I'm not sure. But I think that, I'm for sort of universal civics education. I feel like people don't understand how the government works, or when people, stop things from happening. People say, well, President Biden hasn't done anything. Well, first of all, he's gotten a lot more done than one would assume with the tiny majorities that there have been in the Congress, but also, things he's not gotten done are because things were blocked by his opponents. And then they get to say, look, he hasn't done anything.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's one of my pet peeves is the civics issue. Many people probably couldn't pass a basic citizenship test if you ask them, and that's for getting your citizenship if you're coming into the country. And one of the things from that is that they, how can you actually stand and take an oath to anything? We take oaths in the courtroom. We take oaths for being elected to different positions. You take an oath if you're going to become a police officer or fireman, right? The different oaths we take. And in the military, we have the enlisted oath and the officer's oath, and you're taking those. And how can you take an oath to a country you know nothing about? You have to have that civics lesson instilled in you so that you understand what you are taking an oath to. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America. So what does that mean if you don't know what the United States of America stands for or what the civics behind it is? And I think they cut a lot of that out of the schools or glossed it over, or just did a poor job of instructing people on that. I get really incensed when I see different late night shows on television, and they walk up to someone and say, well, what president was George Washington? What number was that? They go like, I don't know, 5, 10, 15. I mean, basic things that people just don't know about, how the legislative structure, what are the 3 branches of government, so I'm totally with you on that. And I think maybe that's something that needs to be brought up too. We need to reinvigorate that understanding of what the country is. I've been to, in my military career, 26 different countries, right, over time, over my time course of being in the military. And I can tell you, I feel much more comfortable every time I get home. You're looking at what people have to confront and face in many countries. They don't have the items and luxuries that we have here. And we sort of take things for granted. But I think we need to have an understanding of what that means, what it means to be, a citizen of this country and having the right to vote and being able to go out and express your opinion freely without, reprimand or being thrown into a prison. We're seeing, one of our reporters right now being thrown into prison in Russia, right? And, we don't know what his fate is going to be because of the way that they operate their court system. So we have a lot to be grateful for here that we just take for granted. And I think people need to sort of wake up a bit and say, well, this is a really critical time, as you were saying, that we're confronting more divisiveness than ever before in history. And we need to come back to a consensus that we are American citizens. And in order for this country to survive, we have to come together. We have to work things out. not run away from them and pick up our arms and go to the different poles,
I think it would be helpful if people sort of knew
the
what
political.
what government can and can't do. I think that's that sort of understanding is lacking. And so it becomes easy to sort of, provide misinformation and disinformation, excuse me, and, promise people things that you can't deliver, or tell people things that can't be delivered that actually could be delivered. I think people are genuinely confused. I know that I'm genuinely confused about issues sometimes that I don't cover. It's one of the reasons I became a journalist. I hope to explain things to people in a way that they can understand what it is that's at stake and what it is that they want. I mean, sometimes, people say they don't vote because they don't know who to vote for, because they can't figure out who would best represent what they want, which is kind of a frustration with our politics and a frustration with our media. It is a big thorny issue, but I feel like it's only gotten worse over the last 15 or 20 years.
Yeah, and and that's one of the things that really strikes at the heart, is that when we talking about what do veterans do for our country, and someone asked me this before, when I went to Iraq for the first time, they said, well, what were you doing over there, protecting, President Bush's oil and, investments and all these things. And I said, that doesn't matter to me. And they looked at me and they said, what do you mean it doesn't matter to you? And I said, I put my hand up to take an oath to defend the nation against foreign and domestic enemies. That is what I did. What it did was give you the right to have public debate and discussions, to be engaged with the political process, to vote, and to be able to stop us from going to a war if you think it's unjust. But that's not my position. That is not what I do. What I do is step up and defend the nation when it becomes necessary. If you're not involved in the political process, then why are you asking me a question like that? So did you vote? Have you written your Congress people, congressional members and senators? Have you actually done anything to talk about what you're talking about, other than be an armchair quarterback after the game is over? So I am, of that notion that people need to be more engaged in the political process, because you're a citizen. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to have these discussions, and not, where you become so diametrically opposed, or you become so polarized that you can't see someone else's position. We need to have more rational talks, and come to conclusions that really preserve what the Constitution was supposed to be giving us. And it was the freedom, to express ourselves, but also the freedom of choice, and to be able to live your life the way you feel you should be able to, within legal parameters, right? And I really feel that we need to bring that back. And it goes back to that core issue about civics. I think you were talking about that people need to learn that they have a position in the country, and they need to be involved. So one of the greatest things they can do is actually go out and vote. The people that I was dealing with had to go overseas and fight, and some lost their lives. Voting is a much easier thing to do, a much easier task. So thank you so much. And we always run out of time really quickly, but you're going to be back on, I know. So thank you so much, Julie Rovner, Chief Washington correspondent and host of the KFF News and Weekly Health Policy Podcast. Listening to her, really great information coming out of that.